Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
What would people do without these recordings?
What would they do?
I don't know.
So Reddit was interesting again this week.
Yeah, you got.
We're doing the second week on C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity.
Very good, nice.
Christianity, week 2. We have an email address, so you can come and yell at me on Reddit if you want, or you could also send us angry emails through Gmail.
That's true. If you want to see some of the, debris, Anthony Calkins music, right?
Yep. Oh, that's the Reddit.
I should bleep that.
Wait, why?
That. It'll be funnier.
No, but the email address is plausible-deniability-amx@gmail.com.
Yeah, we might actually have somebody from the comments on, right? Potentially.
Yeah,
person.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
We should probably... Oh, we were just talking about having a one-off episode. Maybe we ought to try to do it with them.
But then we got to order the book and read it.
That's true.
Yeah. I need more time. I don't think I can do that by then.
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah. Okay. Well,
so before we even talk about these chapters, one thing I will say is reading them is a breeze.
Yes.
This has been such an easy... It is a joy, in a way, to read such an easy chapter of a book.
I know. I mean, it's like reading Rosewater Lane. You can really tell who... When people think about the art of writing, you can really tell.
Yes.
And obviously C.S. Lewis has, given, his background.
It'd
and
be funny if he'd
Lane,
never considered it.
Yeah. He's like, wow, I'm actually pretty good at this. It's like, dude, you already wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then Rosewater Lane, I mean, she was a writer, obviously, of other things other than...
Right.
And her mom, too, obviously.
Well, there's the conspiracy theory that she just wrote all the books and passed it off as her mom as like libertarian propaganda.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know who put that, I don't know who that benefits. I guess I see. The libertarians. Well, it didn't do a very good job. I mean, here we are, right?
Yeah, right.
100 years of propaganda from Rosewater Lane.
Yeah, right.
I read The Little House on the Prairie. I don't remember thinking, wow, this is really libertarian. Maybe if I read it again. I certainly read Ayn Rand thinking that.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think whatever. We don't have to talk about that.
Yeah, who cares? So anyway, you got a lot of... Yeah, I mean, people weren't mad at you, though. That was kind of interesting.
I've had a few I've had a few that are sort of obnoxious in the last couple of days come in.
That's... of course. I mean, yeah, that's par for the course right there.
Yeah. There was an interesting comment because I made a point in my post sort of trying to refute what C.S. Lewis was saying last week about how selfishness is sort of universally thought of as morally bad. And I was saying that the libertarian and objectivist movements are built on the idea of pursuing self-interest as a moral good. And then somebody said that I was unfairly making a dig at libertarians. It's like, not at all.
Yeah,
I don't think it's a dig even a little bit.
And you were like, you completely missed the point.
Yeah.
I mean, your whole point was it was an axis of good.
Right. Yeah. There's that too. Somebody else said that it was sort of funny that it's talking about libertarian philosophy doesn't count because you can't consider libertarians people. And then it went on to say that their philosophy is as good as slave owners and ethno-nationalists.
Well, that certainly is that narrative is out there for sure. And I think it's
that they're not people.
No, that they're like ethno-nationalists and slave owners and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how many people don't understand what it is. But I guess that's because it is quite a hodgepodge of people. I mean, certainly you have those people in the group, unfortunately. But you have people like that.
Pro-slavery libertarians?
No, not pro-slavery, probably not. No, not pro-slavery, but potentially ethno-national.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything in libertarian philosophy that would preclude that.
Right.
But slavery for sure.
Well, yeah, of course. Yes, definitely. But I think that's probably what bothers people, why people go down that route, because it's like, well, if you don't have any explicit principles that say that's not allowed, then
how many political philosophies do? It's not like there's anything about like the Democratic Party that would be against ethno-nationalism in its root. In fact, there have been many ethno-nationalist Democrats in the past. I mean, that's a silly...
like North Korea.
But like, is the party filled with ethno-nationalists? No.
No, but it's the idea that like egalitarianism is a little bit more built into the democratic, a lot of people's conception of democracy, right? And so it's hard to think that you could get an ethno-national state out of an egalitarian
Maoist
principle.
China, Cambodia, like you said, North Korea. I think it happens every time.
Yeah, but are they democratic? I know that the people's, the communist...
They claim to be.
Well, I mean, and then this is what I was going to just say. Yeah. So does North Korea. But are they democratic? Right. They're the Democratic Republic of North Korea, right?
No, they do.
Democratic People's Republic. I'm sorry.
They claim to be. I don't know. Are communists democratic? They say they are.
Right, but now we're getting, we're getting into a whole thing. But I'm just saying that I think I'm just saying how I think people go there. Again, I agree that I think most libertarians don't believe that, but I don't know. I mean, but that's kind of the whole point. And I think that's what scares people is the idea of not, even if somebody believes that, not trying to control them.
Right.
Is kind of the idea. Unless they start to screw with you. That's when you that's when you can push back. But that's the whole idea of the non-aggression principle, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So anyway, it's interesting. I was talking to an older person about this, and because about the Ted Brown interview. Actually, anyway, I don't know. This is probably. Should we? Maybe I'll put this at the end. Maybe or maybe we'll talk about it. We'll come back to this. Let's get into the meat of the podcast. Yeah.
All right. So C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, Book 2. What is the title? What Christians Believe. Those wacky Christians and their crazy beliefs.
And selflessness.
Yeah, right. So before we get into any specifics, I feel like this chapter was much, much more explicitly Christian in like the kind of stuff you hear at church.
Yeah, and also kudos to you because you definitely called the whole, anthropomorphizing God thing, I mean,
it's just because I've heard it before. It's not like
I know, but it's exactly what he was talking about in this. Because he opens up. I agree. He's also much more explicit about his own belief and everything like that, and stuff. But he opens it by talking about 3 divisions. The first division, those who believe in God versus those who don't. And I think it's interesting that he admits, he was an atheist for many years. You're nodding your head.
Oh yeah, nobody can see this. It's not kind of me, but this is like a mind reading and eye rolling thing. I don't know C.S. Lewis's history, but there is a common refrain amongst a certain type of Christian that they described themselves as an atheist before they were baptized, even though they went to church their whole life, they believed their whole life. That there's this thing where it's kind of the evangelical story that they're telling to get non-believers on board, but what they mean, there's a trick in what they mean. What they mean is not that they were didn't believe in God. What they mean is that they had not yet been baptized.
I don't know if that's what he means in this. Because I think he was baptized. I think he's just... And also he's talking about similar principles that atheists believe in.
Yeah.
when you think about it, like, how could there be a God with all this suffering kind of stuff? Like,
Right.
he was admitting he was making all those arguments.
Right.
And he is addressing those arguments in this.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it can be explained away that easily, but I'm with you. I don't know his history super well, other than what you told me. He fought in World War I and stuff,
Right.
Yeah, and he would have been really young.
Right.
Because I think he was born in 1898.
Mm-hmm.
So the first division, those who believe in God versus those who don't.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second division, those who believe in God, those who believe God is good versus those who think that he's bad, basically, I guess.
Or neutral.
Neutral, yeah. And then third division is those who believe God is a man versus those who, or a person rather, versus those who believe God is the universe. And so he was saying polytheists will often, pantheists, sorry, yes. Polyamorous, no.
Yeah, right.
Pantheists believe, often he was saying you'll hear them talk about as if God is like the universe and sort of working within us and stuff. Although I Christians kind of talk about that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, and then I have here, to your point, here we go, talking about God as a man, and then making the point again, how if we don't know something is bad, we couldn't even know something is bad without a reference. So that's like his big thing about going back to the universal moral law, which is what we talked about in the first episode. And that's a big refrain is how we wouldn't know darkness if it was dark. We'd have no conception of it,
Right.
So the fact that we know that there's a bad and there's a good means that, there's something else out there.
Right.
So anyway, that's, I feel like, kind of the main stuff he was addressing, at least at the beginning.
Yeah. The end goes into a lot of very narrative things that are all interesting and then all also in some ways less interesting to me.
Yeah.
Like he goes into the story of Jesus, like the Christ figure, and God as fully divine and fully human, and repentance with respect to what is owed to the creator of the universe, because we have, as humans, free will and sort of act outside of God's wishes of us. And so a debt is owed to this God for this sin. And so God as human can sacrifice himself to pay that debt perfectly because he's God.
Well, and I thought it was interesting because I think one of the things when you said that you weren't a Christian was like you don't believe in the death, right? Or you don't believe in the resurrection. That's right. I guess you can believe in the death potentially.
No, I think he's still kicking. I think he never died. I think he never rose. I think he's still living in Judea.
Yeah, but I was thinking because let's see, at some point he is saying. Central Christian belief equals Christ's death has somehow put us right with God and given us a fresh start. We will never fully be able to understand this because it is something beyond our world. Just like the atom's description is not real. That's the analogy he's using. Mm-hmm. So, and he's making this analogy between sort of like that idea, and he's trying to say why, even if you feel like it's like kind of absurd, he's trying to make the point that it's beyond our understanding. So this is just an analogy, essentially. Right. Just like the analogy of Niels Bohr's atom, like those rings. Like we learned that like an atom doesn't really have like those concentric electrons. I mean, they're revolving, but it's not as neat as you would see in Bohr's model. Mm-hmm. And so he's making that point that, we infer this stuff from formulas, but we use, these analogies to visualize things essentially.
Right.
And yeah, so I thought that was an interesting point. And then he's also making the point that like, in the end, we have to. Oh, he's making the same point, like you were saying about how Satan is trying to tell us that we're godlike, and so that's always you have this dichotomy of the satanic telling you to be selfish, that you can be like God and stuff like that. And then you have the opposite,
Right.
which is, selflessness and giving up to sort of a higher authority kind of thing and whatnot. And so this obviously made me think about Nietzsche, right? And
He even says beyond good and evil.
yes. I was wondering if that was a specific reference to that.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, because that's Nietzsche's whole thing, is the opposite, which makes sense because Nietzsche proclaims he's the Antichrist, right? But this is the whole sort of lore behind Lucifer, like the bringer of light, which there are theories out there. Lucifer was really, the pre-Luciferian person was Prometheus, right, who stole the fire from the gods and gave it to man. And so this is always kind of the argument that I have a hard time squaring in my head, because you have Christians who are pro-science and all that stuff, and we've read some of them, right? But I really don't understand how you can be, because I do feel like that is the idea, that the central tenet of Christianity is about belief and not knowledge. But I know that there's lots of writers out there who have talked about how knowledge is like God, or it's okay to pursue science and stuff like that from a Christian perspective. But
Right.
It does feel like from a fundamental point, you shouldn't pursue science, because it's all trying to make heaven on earth at the end.
Maybe. I think that I guess there's different sort of modes of science and what it's doing too, because you need science to be able to create an airplane, but you don't need to pursue like totalistic material philosophy in order to have airplanes.
See, I don't know if that's true, because I would say we pursued totalistic material philosophy and got airplanes.
Maybe.
It was like,
I'm saying you don't need to, because like there were bridges before there was like highly materialistic science as we think of it today.
Yeah, but there were bridges before Christianity,
Of course.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is, certainly, well, just look at the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages were, by many accounts, probably the most pious Europe was.
Right.
And then since then, it's been a slow sort of descent of it. And what has happened as we've moved away from Christ in a way, we have gotten all this.
Right. I mean, we've also become more pious in some ways. I think the story that like it was super religious and now it's less religious isn't really true.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, because it's the idea that the authority was super religious,
right, and those were the people that had pen and paper and were writing things down.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean like everybody in every shop was acting super religious all the time.
No, but they were being held back. And so once you had sort of the free thinkers in the Renaissance pushing back against this, the Newtons, all of these heretics in many ways, that's when you started to have the intense progression. And again, I'm not discounting the fact, and Nietzsche says it himself, but again, Nietzsche hates German philosophy. It's like Europe and Christianity are obviously like intertwined. Their histories are intertwined, So it's hard to say that we would have gotten here without the, I guess, primordial Christian upbringing. But this is why I say Christianity is ultimately leaning into consciousness, and really it was just getting us to, it was just a, way to explain to people who couldn't understand their minds before we had a conception of the minds. It was a way to explain that to them. And now that we have a more nuanced understanding of consciousness and everything, we can start talking more directly about consciousness, I think.
Right.
Which is why it always comes down to personifying God as a man, or a person rather, because It is our minds that is creating the religious sort of experience. So anyway, I don't know. I'm ranting too much.
I don't know. I just don't follow it again. I'm lost. But my point, hang on. My point is that you can pursue a provisional end that does not require unraveling the universe. So, like, if I'm trying to write a computer program that sends automatic emails or something, I can stop once I figure out how to do that. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to keep going until I've deciphered all the way down to the molecular level how every computer system works. And that's what I'm saying. You can pursue scientific inquiry and advancement without fighting on theological grounds at all.
I want to actually agree with you, because I think you're saying something similar to something I was saying a few episodes ago about how it's like you don't have to pursue every principle to its extreme.
Right.
It sounds kind of like what you're saying.
Yeah, you don't have to. I'm not saying that you could. There are definitely philosophers and scientists who have it as their goal to sort of get to the bottom of everything.
Right.
Which I'm not even saying is a bad thing to do. I'm just saying you don't have to do that. That
no.
Science, that's where the idea that science and religion don't have to be at odds, because they don't have to be addressing the same questions. They could be, and then they will be at odds.
Yeah.
Because the question of how do I get this rock up the hill doesn't have to be a theological question. It can just be a practical question.
No, but it gets to this point. I know people hate me for this, but it's good. I hate you back if you hate me for this. Is that you're engaging consciousness by doing this, and it's anytime you lean into it, you're going to start unraveling the universe, because that's what we do with consciousness. We unravel everything, whereas we don't when we're not thinking about things. So I agree with you. I want to agree with you rather.
I think that we don't
now.
agree on consciousness again. I think that we've lost each other. But yeah. So, like, when you say leaning into consciousness, I don't know what you mean.
I mean, like, how are you going to build a bridge if you're not conscious?
Well, right, because building requires volition.
Planning. Yes, that's my point.
Well, it's not just planning; it also requires will.
Well, yeah, but whatever. But you have to do it, but planning requires will, I would say. So it's kind of
right.
Yeah, it's built into that.
So planning, you'd say that planning is leaning into consciousness.
Yes,
it's the leaning in part that I'm confused about. It's because to me this is just the state of human existence.
No, I mean I feel bad because I have said it many times. So but I can say it again. I think of it as an axis of you're just more conscious or less conscious. So when I say leaning in, I'm saying you're increasing consciousness. You're increasing the amount of that you're reflecting upon things. You're increasing the ability to abstract into the future. And a very sort of the way I really conceive it is like Piaget explains the development of the human brain very well in saying you go through these steps of abstraction. Right. So I would say we are gradually leaning into consciousness in childhood. So it's like you have object permanence. That's like one of the fundamental things. So you can tell that an object still exists even if it goes out of the frame of your sight. So that's like you're one step closer. You're leaning 1 inch into consciousness, and then you can start to abstract shapes. It's like you can understand a triangle. Like understanding a shape and how it relates to the world. That's an abstraction, and that's another step in. And then you can start to understand formulas and variables because you're putting symbols in place of other things. So you're slowly getting more and more abstracted away from reality. And as you do that, that's what I'm calling leaning into consciousness. So you're right. Like just building a bridge and whatever the first, like technologies that humanity evolved to do were very much, they probably weren't thinking about, death and life and what's the meaning and everything. They were just like, there's a problem in the present that I need to do, and to achieve that I need to abstract out of the present a little bit to think about how to solve this. But then as you do that more and more without you even realizing it, you're increasing your consciousness until all of a sudden you start asking these questions about, like, what am I? Why am I here? Oh my gosh, I'm going to die someday. Why am I going to die someday? That sucks. And then it can just unravel from there. And that's my point. That's what the leaning in is, and that's the thing that's difficult to control.
And to me, I don't see how you say Christianity is leaning into it then. To me, then Christianity is like leaning away from it.
We've talked about this, yes. It is teaching you to reflect upon your past. And
Christianity is.
Yes. Even though I agree with you that it's teaching you faith, like overtly, subvertly, it's telling you to reflect more and telling you to monitor yourself and monitor your actions. And this was Nietzsche's point. And I did make this point a lot. So I'm sorry if I didn't make it well, but I was trying to make that point in the Antichrist.
Nietzsche's point, as I understand it, was that Christianity is trying to destroy consciousness.
That was what you were saying, and I was disagreeing with you on that.
So I still think that's what he's saying.
That's fine. You can go listen back and decide if you still believe that. Because this is the point that I was trying to make, though, is that it just like and it was the Judith Butler. I was calling the Judith Butler analogy of, consciously trying to become unconscious, essentially.
Uh-huh.
That's like what it's like. I guess Christianity's unconsciously trying to become conscious.
Well, because Nietzsche is separating the priests from the idiot masses, right? And so the priests are highly conscious,
yes,
and they're trying to keep the masses unconscious.
Right.
And so to me, Christianity is the system of what the masses are engaging in.
Well, and that was my point, though, is the priests, I agree, are trying to keep them subservient, essentially, to God or whatever, and to them. But the tools that they're teaching them are, without them realizing at the time, teaching the masses to lean into consciousness, which is why it caused the revolutions that it caused, like the Protestant Reformation.
You could be correct about that, but I don't think that's what Nietzsche is saying.
Well, no, he's not. And this is where I disagree with Nietzsche. I think I said that in the episodes, too.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway,
okay, so what?
Well, no. I mean, so what is, I brought it up because you're saying that these Christian apologists always bring it back to a person. And that I was trying to tell you why I feel that is the way, because I look at Christianity as it is the step towards really thinking about the consciousness more directly. It's a primordial step towards that goal. And,
So I feel like there's a lot of things I agree with you on. But I have this annoyed thing in my head right now where it's like, I think a lot of what you're saying is right, and you're making a lot of good points, but I'm in too bad of a mood.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's fine. And also, I feel I shouldn't bring it up as much. The problem is, as people have probably inferred, I am using this podcast to explore these ideas and try to challenge these ideas that I've been thinking about for a while. So that's why I bring them up.
I think a lot of what you're saying has a lot of narrative power. I think that. Yeah. Well, hang on. Hey, let me say what I'm going to say. Jesus Christ. Okay, so I think when you say Christianity is leaning into consciousness, I hear back to conversations we have of God is consciousness. And so, by definition, religion is seeking God or leaning into God. So that makes that comports. To me, that's just a different way of saying Christians love God. It's a different way of putting that same idea. And so that's where when you're talking about what you're talking about, it resonates with me. I think that there's truth in what you're saying, whether you go, it or not. I think I'm stuck because I'm stuck in the postmodernist thing, where to me it's just, and I don't mean this in a rude way, but it might come off as rude. It is another religious myth, essentially. And Piaget, the thing is, it isn't that Piaget doesn't have explanatory power, but so do a lot of religious stories in a way, and this is where I'm sort of lost in the world, is like Piaget is also telling a story. And it's a story that we use to explain something in our world.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it's time for me to tell you that I am the Son of God. I've been brought to the world to teach people about consciousness.
Yeah, right.
And you're failing, quite frankly, Antushka. Good. Or rather, I'm failing. No. No, I agree with you, what you're saying. I think it can, it certainly is a narrative. It certainly could be mythologized. I think it's less, it is different because, there are facts. There are more sort of objective facts, or as objective that you can get, right? People have studied people versus just you have a story of somebody and then this story gets repeated. Obviously, It can become that over time, but the idea is Piaget is telling you, hey, look, this is something you can observe. Go observe it yourself and tell me.
He has observations.
That's much harder.
But facts and observations are a little different, though, because he's observing and then he's coming up with an explanation for what he observed. But his explanation, that's not a fact.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we want to go down the track of what is a fact, because you're right, that's a tough thing.
Well, I think it actually relates to this reading. I think that this reading is getting at the very heart of the root of belief and knowledge. And this is what I was butting up against on Reddit this week. And I was actually getting very frustrated on Reddit. Not because people were vehemently disagreeing with me, but it just felt like I was not being understood in a frustrating way, where I'd either be saying the same thing as them and they're arguing with me, or it's like they aren't even aware of what they're saying. And I kept using this ruler analogy that we talked about last time. But actually, there's a quote I have right here from the chapter. This is C.S. Lewis, and I think it's getting at the same idea. He says, this is when he's talking about how before he was Christian, when he didn't believe in God, he says, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? And I think you made the point earlier when you were talking about dark and light. It's sort of like different versions of the same idea cropping up again and again and again. And he talks about it when he talks about the dualistic view of the universe, how there's two competing forces. And if you think one is a good force and one is a bad force, you have already established what he calls is a god or some source of comparison. And for me, what I was trying to do on Reddit this week was not say God, but say objective standard. That in order to even compare two things, you need a standard of comparison. Like, you wouldn't know things were different if you didn't have a way of defining difference and sameness. Mm-hmm. Like, it's so, even the act of, it's so deep. Even the act of sheer comparison means that you have an objective standard in your mind.
You have a reference.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's just he's claiming the reference comes from God, and the postmodernists would say it comes from your cultural sort of...
right. So, like, somebody claimed that, a lot of people are claiming that sort of morality comes from various sort of things like... survival instinct, human flourishing, things like that. And where I'm trying to push them, and I haven't gotten any real answers, is where they are asserting that something is preferable to something else. And why do they think it's preferable? Because there are those who would argue that human flourishing is a bad thing. There's a whole like anti-human movement, extinctionism, antinatalism, all of these things. And there are those that argue that selfishness is good and selfishness is bad. So I'm not trying to push an idea that, like C.S. Lewis was doing, in that human morality is basically the same across cultures. I don't know if that's true, and I suspect that there are some striking similarities, but I don't know. However, I think that C.S. Lewis is getting on something very deep, and I think very true, that we don't think about, is that there is some agreed upon objective basis of comparison that most people have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's definitely what he's getting at, and he made that interesting point about authority in there. You know, he's like, most of what you believe,
yes, that's
is based off of authority.
Yes. I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true too. You know, like, I've never been to New York, but I assume it exists, right?
Right.
However, you do see this breaking down today. So there's some, I guess, more subversive podcasts that I listen to. I won't even say the names, but one of them is one of the people in them is so, like, I guess you could say black-pilled or whatever, the pill. I can't believe I just used the pill analogy. I've already said I hate all the pill analogies. Anyway, freaking Matrix really did a number on our culture.
Yeah.
But as so, I guess, cynical about authority that they you know, and I think part of it's comedic effect, but they just say, like, nothing is, they don't believe anything, right? So they'll, you know, it's like, sure, maybe the earth's flat, maybe, you know, blah blah blah, all this stuff. And obviously, you know, I think this is sort of the pathological extent of skepticism, you know. But I think this is actually very prevalent in our society because we live in a time when we're viewing so many of the authorities be wrong.
Right.
So, and I think that's why you have so many people that are asking these questions about objective truth. Because, yeah, I mean, the authorities in the past, they had slavery, right? And that's the whole thing, right? It's like, how could you be an authority and try to be in the moral right if you're enslaving people? That's at least one large narrative that I think causes a lot of people to push away from quote authority. Or we could look at just a lot of people have issues with how COVID was handled, right? Or even 9/11 kind of stuff for Afghanistan, wars, blah, 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 JFK, CIA, etc. All of that stuff is causing everybody to not believe. So it was very interesting seeing in the 1942 when C.S. Lewis was giving this speech that, yeah, I mean, when I think about that time, I do think that was the height of the authority, where you would just believe somebody because they were in a position of power. And we've said this before on the podcast. All the philosophy after that was, in my head, it was people saying, okay, look at these people who said they were right, and to listen to them. Look what happened. So now let's break everything down. Now we'll get Foucault, we'll get Judith Butler.
Right.
So I agree with you that it seems like everybody has some measure to weigh things. I think that measure is based off of their aggregated observations, but I still haven't exactly teased out objective truth versus subjective truth. And this is something we started talking about on the podcast way back on the first Foucault episode. And I still haven't reconciled that. You made a great point in that about, because I was trying to say truth is based off of, like, it's like the number of correlates that agree, basically.
Right.
But you brought up a good sort of counter to that. But it still feels like it might be something along those lines. It's like objective truth is something about correlating a bunch of things together so that they all agree, whether it's multiple people observing something and agreeing with it, or you seeing something with all five of your perceiving something with your five senses and your senses agreeing. Because this is why schizophrenia is quote crazy, because they can see things but they might not be able to touch them, right? And, or whatever. It's like all the senses aren't coherent in that sense.
Right.
So,
but slavery is a good one. It's a good example, because what I find, and what I did find, is people will make arguments that will suggest that slavery was once morally right and is no longer morally right, which is a very strange argument to me. Because those exact same people will talk about how evil slavery is. Like, they'll say Christian morality is really bad for whatever reason, and perhaps, I don't know. Like, I don't really care about that question one way or the other. What's very interesting to me is that those who argue against morality having an objective standard will then always give me an objective standard of morality.
Yes.
Like human flourishing or like whatever. Like they will then...
like egalitarianism.
Fine. And then I always ask them, where is this standard coming from?
Right.
Why do you believe this to be... Why is this morally good? And they'll say because like it helps the human species or something like that. And it's like, where is the universe compelling us to help the human species?
I actually think that just putting it that simply might be a great Reddit question. Maybe putting it that simply wouldn't be, though. But like, I
tried, and people were just like, "That's just nature." And it's like, you just told me that's how God works. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. You just told me that's the nature of God. That's what God wants.
So for you, where do you think it comes from, Mr. Antushka?
I don't know.
Wow.
I have no answer to this question. Mm-hmm. It's the same as where did the it's the Big Bang. I have no idea, and I don't even know how to know. And so C.S. Lewis is kind of trying to provide a template for how to know, but I don't find his argument particularly compelling. Mm-hmm. What I find compelling about him is I feel like he's butting up against something important.
Right. Yeah.
And I think dismissing it, a lot of people dismissed it, which is what I find obnoxious because, like, it's probably like you feel like consciousness is really important. This feels like crucially important to me.
Where does objective truth come from? Or if it exists, where does it come from?
What is the question? Morality. What is our standard for morality? Right. Where are shoulds and shoulds coming from?
Well, that's. I mean, so in my head, it is a bit of I guess it is a bit of the postmodernist perspective. It's like what I think is universal, and I said this on the last episode. It seems like is an axis, right? We always come back to binaries, and it's just how you tune that axis seems to be what's different, and that appears to be dependent upon your experience and your genetics.
Yeah, like a completely relative. Like, so slavery might not be wrong from your perspective. Like, its wrong or rightness is really just a matter of like our orientation on that axis.
Well, for me, it's wrong.
Of course, I'm not saying for you. I'm saying your cosmic belief about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have to think that because it, like you said, it's existed for so many years, and I think that even the slave owners had some conception of good and bad, so they must have had some way of explaining it away, as the current slave owners in the 21st century do, right? And it's probably because they were able to abstract themselves away from the actual sort of fact of, you know.
Well, are you saying that you think cosmically it's wrong or cosmically it's neutral?
I'm saying that this is where... No, I mean, this is where I think if you really push me on it, I think I end up in the same position as you, whereas I don't know. Because it's like, I want to say that it's cosmically wrong, right? But I can't know that it is outside of my perspective.
I have the opposite. I want to say it's cosmically neutral, but I don't think that's true.
That's hilarious. That we're opposite.
Because I like, in a weird, like, perverse way, I like the idea of, like, the universe is silent to man's pleas for understanding, that kind of a thing.
Right.
But I don't think that's true.
Well, so this is why I kind of wanted to, though self-serving, I wrote an article about David Hartley, who was an 18th century physician scientist. I brought him up before. He was an associationist philosopher, and he was training to be a clergyman, an Anglican clergyman, before he decided he wanted to go into medicine. And he wrote this book called, like, Observations of Man, His Frame, and His Expectations. And it was basically what he was trying to do was he started by trying to reconcile Locke's associationist theory that he put forth in his Theory of Human Understanding or something, Essay of Human Understanding, whatever the title is, that famous book about where Locke puts his associationist philosophy down. And Newton's, he had this vibration theory of how the nerves transmit information. And so he's putting these together because he was trying to show how basically, he was basically putting together a behavioralist framework. But because of his Christian background, he was also, he added this interesting Christian element where he was saying basically our frames are designed such that everyone will become good if enough time passes.
Right.
Everybody becomes selfless and empathic and whatnot given enough time.
Right.
And it's because of how our minds are framed. And of course, he said our minds are framed this way because of God.
Right.
But without even going to that point, part of the reason I have a hard time answering your question about this is because there is a part of me that feels like that believes that
believes
our
what?
minds that our minds the fundamental mechanism of our mind does lead everybody, if you give them enough time, to become good in the Christian sense, which is again why I feel like Christianity is kind of like an important part for humanity in the trek of understanding their mind,
right?
Because it is explaining something about the mind. Because, and this is where it's like I've talked about how empathy doesn't exist without consciousness, and whatnot. Because how can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes if you have no mental bandwidth to project out of the present? Right. Putting yourself in somebody else's shoes is, by definition, taking yourself out of your, you need RAM.
Yes.
You need RAM. So,
yes.
So and our brains seem to be able to increase the amount of consciousness RAM over time, blah, blah, blah. So, so getting back to that, it's interesting that well, it's not interesting. I guess it makes sense that we're opposite on that. But yeah.
Well, I agree with everything you just said, though.
Well, that's interesting because you've also, I think last episode, we kind of had an issue with the behavioralist perspective, because that's essentially what I'm saying, too, is that, well, no, you're right. No, I'm not saying that. I'm flip-flopping. But I think if you dig deep enough, it's the David Hartley perspective is the thing that I think I adhere to. Which is why I bring him up so much.
Can you lay it out flat what the perspective is, again?
Oh, yeah. Basically that given time, everybody becomes benevolent and selfless and empathic.
All right, you heard it here, folks.
Yeah. But most people probably die before that happens, which is why you can point to plenty of old people who are, not that way.
Right.
And it also it adds to this question of, well, if we also have diminishment of consciousness with things like Alzheimer's, that kind of thing. But I think his point is more of barring any sort of pathology that perturbs consciousness's development, then that will be the case.
Right.
Which is, again,
it's like the laws of motion, or thermodynamics.
He calls it the law of beneficence, and I think he calls it a law. Yeah, of course he does.
It sounds like what Newton, the objects in motion unless acted upon by an outside force.
Yeah. Well, and exactly. I mean, that was what everybody was doing back then, and I guess is still doing. We're all still trying to do that. Well, maybe we should read Observations.
Sure.
I feel like you wouldn't like it, though. I mean, it's a tough one because it's like 1748.
It's okay. I don't like anything these days. I'm in trouble.
Like anything. Yeah, what's going on with you, man? You said you're in a bad mood today?
Yeah, bad nude.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
why
I don't
said
look good
that.
naked, man.
No, bad nude. Is that why you're sad?
Yeah, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, you look at, yeah, I get that. I can get that. That's the other thing David Hartley said. As we age, our bodies,
I know. I don't
Yeah.
even finish it. I know.
yeah. We become sad nudes. The law of the sad nude.
Yeah, right.
Now,
Yeah, there's some other good stuff in here. There's one that I posted because it's really like the famous C.S. Lewis point. Is at the end of the 3rd chapter in this book, where he talks about what a crazy statement Jesus is making.
Oh yeah.
Which is interesting because actually Nietzsche was talking about like what a pure revolutionary Jesus was versus Paul, who's like doing this terrible thing, and what Jesus was doing was like truly revolutionary. So that's interesting that they coincide on that because C.S. Lewis is saying that nobody had ever said anything as revolutionary and like has never said anything as revolutionary since, which is that Jesus as a man is able to forgive others' sins. And so he talks about how he kind of gives a framework for understanding it, which feels a little bit, I don't know, not super compelling to me, but not thinking of it as Jesus can be punished for you because you need to be punished, but that you have a debt that you owe, and Jesus can pay that debt for you. And it's a common idea I hear, and maybe it's a good conception, but he then goes on to critique people who have kind of a soft view of Jesus, where they say, like, I don't necessarily believe in the whole God thing, but I think that Jesus had some really good teachings, which I think is a common, a modern thing that people like to say. And he sort of flat out rejects this entire line of thinking. And this is where you get Lord Lunatic or Liar as sort of a paraphrase of C.S. Lewis. But his final paragraph in this chapter says, I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. Quote, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. Then back to C.S. Lewis, this is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sorts of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, and you can spit on him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come away with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, and he did not intend to. And that last bit, I like, that it's always left out when people talk about it, that he hasn't left that open to us. He's forcing our hand to choose a side. Which I appreciate, because it's my whole thing about making statements that you can agree with or disagree with.
Well, that's interesting because it's like, that is, I do agree that that's your whole thing. But also, I think you are also in an interesting position where you also seem to not have any core beliefs anymore.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, trust me, I know.
Sorry.
Unmoored is how I would describe myself.
Yes. That's funny.
Out to sea.
Nobody should listen to this podcast. This is no. it's
Anyway,
it's the trouble of delving too deep into things.
Yeah. But this is an interesting idea because it places a lot of weight on where you fall on this, and I appreciate that. But I was curious about your reaction to it.
Yeah. So,
because I would fall on the demon of hell side.
Yeah, I mean, their thoughts, obviously, I've had before, and he sort of reiterates this at the end of the book where he's just talking about, the invasion of God, right?
Yes,
God's going to come back and invade, and,
Yeah.
and at some point, you'll have to choose a side, and and at some point, it'll be too late,
Right.
kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know. I guess, what do you mean, what do I think about it?
Well, so I think what he's saying is that Jesus as a man has no right to pay the sins of others.
Mm-hmm.
And claiming to be able to do that is either a crazy thing to do.
Right.
Or a wicked thing to do because you're tricking people into a false sense of morality. And so I do not believe that vicarious atonement is a good thing. I don't think people should serve each other's prison sentences either.
Do you believe in surrogacy?
Not with respect to that, no. So that is where I would, if my hand is being forced, I say demon in hell, or of hell.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I would say that. It's this is where I'm I guess I do disagree that he didn't leave any options because it's
Right.
the option that I've already kind of said is that I think that, just like Nietzsche, I suppose, that Jesus was a revolutionary figure, whether or not, it was exactly as it's been recounted to us, right?
Right.
The idea of leaning into consciousness and basically how Rosewater Lane describes it, the idea that you are free, right? And you have, I guess, this old Jewish idea that you have will to either do good or do bad, and
Right.
there's one God that's judging you, but you have the ability to choose. That is a very important point. And then the idea of selflessness and beneficence and everything like that, I think is important because, again,
Right.
it's important for the reasons I've already reiterated. So in that sense, I disagree that there are no other options of how to perceive him, because you can perceive Jesus as being, in my head, useful for the anthropological development of human consciousness.
Right. But does that make him God?
You don't have to talk about it in those terms.
Right. That's true.
And I guess that's my point.
Is
So I'm not-
consciousness God?
Well, it's a question that I don't know if can be answered, and
Right.
for my purposes, I don't know if it needs to be. It's certainly there's unknowns, and if you want to call that God, I don't care really. Sometimes I do. I go back and forth on that, but it's
Right.
more of the idea that it's teaching you how to deal with the mind.
Right.
That's what I think is the really important points that Christianity offered humanity,
Right.
is how to handle consciousness.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a good point. That was another good point you made earlier that I forgot to bring up.
No.
But I think, as a side note, as a comment to what you just said, I think that defining God as unknowns is always a mistake. And I know that there's people who like to do that, but I don't think it's a good idea. So defining God as unknowns is a mistake, because then your God will always be changing and shifting. And the nature of your God is amorphous, which is very strange to me. But on the point of Christianity teaching us how to deal with consciousness, somebody in one of the groups on Reddit DM'd me a breakdown of the story of the fall from Eden. And so I was reading it, and I had this sort of thought that felt like an epiphany, but that the story of the fall of Eden is not the fall of man from God, but it's the story of humanity. And it's the story of developing consciousness.
yes,
You're a baby, and your parents don't want you to have it. Your parents are scared of the idea of you developing consciousness. They like your innocence
Mm-hmm.
as a baby. They don't like it when you start learning about people killing. You ask your parents, what does it mean to die? That's a very difficult question for
Mm-hmm.
parents to deal with. And you start learning about sex and all of these things that are all sort of like you're developing awareness and consciousness. And so everybody falls from Eden.
Exactly. I mean, that's essentially what I thought Jordan Peterson was putting forth in all those Bible lectures.
I
that he
think
was
so.
doing.
Well, because it makes me think of a thing Jordan Peterson said recently on a podcast where he was sort of going back and forth with Alex O'Connell, who is a philosopher, a philosophy major.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex was trying to pin him on, like, do you believe that, like, the events in the book of Exodus happened? And Jordan Peterson's answer was very frustrating to Alex, but it really resonates with me, where he said, it doesn't matter at all whether they really happened. They are eternally happening.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Exodus is continually happening all the time to us.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
which is a very
yes.
powerful idea to me, because to me, it's like the religious myths of the Bible are teaching us about us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Like, they're less about
yes.
God as they're more about us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. I mean, I completely agree. And I should say, Jordan Peterson was putting this forth, who was getting it from, like, Jung was essentially,
Right,
I mean, this is essentially where Jung was going. And I think, so this has been a long narrative of people getting to this point of realizing, the fact, I think, that the Bible is essentially trying to teach a conscious animal how to deal with the craziness of being conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think your point about being a parent and with kids is exactly right. This is the development of consciousness is the fall from Eden. We start as animals.
Right.
How do we view animals? Animals are innocent,
Right. And you can see it. It's crazy starting to think of, there's the fall from Eden, and then there's, like, humanity gone awry. Too conscious. We're building a tower to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And God's like, no. I'm going to kill everybody. And then come down to Abraham. And then where Abraham succeeds, we talked about this last week, I think, or it was the week before. I think it was last week, is the kernel is faith. And so faith is the antidote to
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. Faith is how to live successfully in the world.
Yes, which is essentially, in my head, not reflecting.
Right,
and not,
exactly.
Yeah,
Trusting.
which is the animal state.
Right.
Which I agree is important to do on occasions.
Well, I would say that a huge amount of our activity is, quote, faith-based. Like, we don't start question the seat we're sitting in.
Yes,
We don't
yes.
question our ability to talk. Like, we don't
Mm-hmm.
we don't cripple ourselves. And some people do, but a lot of
Right.
people don't cripple themselves in every single engagement. And
No.
C.S. Lewis wrote about this, about the idea. He was kind of talking about simplicity and complexity. And, like, any situation can be sort of infinitely complex if you start reducing it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and yeah, whether you want to call it faith or subconscious, it's like that's the thing. Is it's just
Right.
however you want to describe it. But I completely agree that, like, 95% of what we do is instinctual and subconscious, autonomic,
Right.
and then there's the tip of the iceberg that is our consciousness, that is sort of maneuvering, it's just putting
Mm-hmm.
in the just pushing us towards different things,
Right.
within that.
It's the rudder or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, but the motor is going,
Right.
as evidenced by the fact that we don't begin conscious. And this is why I put so much emphasis on behavioralism to that exact point, because I think the amount of our behavior that's, like you were just saying, that's dictating our everyday action is tremendous. Mm-hmm. And this behavior is caused by repetition of things. It's just like how you're going to learn a song. You just play it a bunch of times. How you're going to learn any behavior.
Right.
You just play it all a bunch until like, oh, okay, well, I've been sitting in this lecture hall seat the whole time, so I guess I'll just keep sitting here.
Right. I feel like it's that last point where I start to feel feelings of skepticism.
Well, that was obviously a little bit weaker. I mean, you could use better versions. I mean, honestly,
not the examples. I mean, like that behaviors come out of repetition.
Oh, well, that's interesting that you don't believe that.
It's not that I don't. It's not that I actively don't believe it. It's that it just. I don't know. I'm just like I feel like I'm being open about my internal reaction to things, but it's I hear it and I start thinking like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I mean, because you had pushed on this a few episodes ago too,
right,
so
right.
I do know that you feel this way. Maybe another reason why we read the observations, because David Hartley he's even more extreme in the behavioral feeling. Like he's talking about how you can see the association of a child that was hit putting up their arm to block.
Right.
He's saying that you can see that associative behavior developed as a child gets transferred into the behavior of a bully hitting somebody. So the child that gets hit as they put up their arm then will, use that arm to hit. So obviously I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of grasping a little bit, but
I mean, it's not that it doesn't make any sense. I can see the logic. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But it feels like it's a thin thread, but it's just, I mean, I think about it how, if I'm practicing a piece and I just am accidentally practicing it the wrong way,
right,
without even realizing it, it's really hard to break that, right, because of the repetition. And this is, again, why I'm kind of surprised that you are skeptical on this, as you are a musician and you do this in practice all the time.
Right. It's not that I don't believe that habits can be... programmed. It's not that I don't believe that. It's that I don't necessarily think that is the sole mechanism for the creation of behavior.
Right. Which gets back to how you feel like you want to believe that the universe is neutral, but you feel like it's not, I think.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, as we've dug into this, it's probably that I probably do believe that there is some kind of, like I said, I think I have the David Hartley approach that any conscious being does become empathic, because it's hard, as you lean into consciousness, it's hard to not think about others.
Sure.
Because you're thinking about everything. But anyway, there's plenty of counters to that. As he said in this, the building up civilizations, and then, selfish people get in and end up burning them down. Mm-hmm. But then I would say selfish people aren't conscious. But plenty of people could be like, well, the people in charge appear to be highly conscious because they at least appear to be highly intelligent. Mm-hmm. But then I guess those aren't necessarily paired. Anyway, who cares? I'm just ranting now, and I think we've hit all the major points. Maybe not. Wickedness equals pursuit of something good in the wrong way. Would you think
yes, I highlighted that too. I liked it. It was a neat quote. Mm-hmm. Yes, I thought that was an interesting point, because he was saying that people do not have the capacity to be evil for evil's sake. That isn't something that exists in the human world. There can be people being good, and there can be people being bad in the pursuit of good things, for bad reasons or things like that. He talks about sadists, who the idea is that people who derive pleasure from hurting others. The derivation of pleasure is not inherently a bad thing, but then the use of hurting others in order to derive that is the bad thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a good point. I mean, it gets the way he talks. We're in a lot of like theological territory where the specific stories he's using, I'm not really. They don't resonate with me that much, but it's an interesting idea that there is really like goodness is primary, and I think this was the thrust of that section is that badness actually stems from goodness, and there's a funny line from the South Park movie where Satan is singing, and he says, "Without evil there can be no good, so it must be good to be evil sometimes," and this is negating that entirely. It's saying no, like there is good. And without good, there could be no evil, but it does not go the other way.
Yeah. Well, what did you think about the you cannot be bad for the mere sake of being bad? Because this is on that point. He was saying you can be good for the sake of being good. Like that happens all the time. I didn't really understand his reasoning on the opposite here, though.
Interesting. I think that basically that's true. I think that the rare situation of being bad for the sake of being bad, not having a moral excuse as to why it's actually good for you to bomb this village in this situation, or why it's actually good for you to steal, but just doing something that you are deriving no benefit from for the sake of being evil is like, I guess Satan could do that. So like if you were completely if you completely rejected all of your humanity and chose to like give in to oblivion, to me like suicide is the closest thing to doing a bad act in the name of doing a bad act or something like that. Because you're not even deriving pleasure from it. There's no benefit. You are choosing to like reject all goodness.
Yeah. I don't know, because it's like, I just had that stupid. It's a stupid point, kind of, but it is relevant. The whole Batman. Some people just want to watch the world burn. Sometimes that feels true, though. Like that, there are people like that.
Right, but they want. That's the thing. Is they're still pursuing something. They're pursuing their own pleasure.
And then you could say that, again, this requires consciousness. So, because I can think of plenty of animals that appear to be just doing bad for no reason, right? But there's not really a reflection there, right?
Well, yeah, I think he says animals can't really do bad, or like a cow
that's
can't.
my point. Yes, and I think it's. He probably doesn't say it like that, but I think it's because it requires reflection.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe I do agree with that.
I think at the very least it would be an incredibly rare situation.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, because you're right. If it's a reflective, conscious person, anything they do, they have some justification in their head for it.
Most people don't think that they are doing evil.
Right. Because they have some justification for it.
Yeah.
Or they're not reflecting on it.
Yeah.
In which case it's a moot point.
Yeah.
So I think I do agree with that. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I like that point. I like that he brought that up.
So I thought when you were bringing up that like famous quote, I thought it was going to be that, he calls Jesus's actions asinine fatuity.
Yeah, that's good too. Yeah. I also like that he said repentance is no fun at all. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Anything else?
I thought it was good. I mean, it was interesting. Again, it was also a nice, easy read. He does, he makes good logical points. I still come away thinking about Nietzsche, of course, of like, okay, here's another priestly type weaving their web of words. But yeah, he makes good points. Yeah.
Yeah. The Antichrist idea was ringing strong this whole time. I have a note that the idea of self-interest as being a force of Satan, and then I have a philosophical disagreement, and perhaps this is why Dionysus is the Antichrist and why Nietzsche is the Antichrist.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, that is why, I think. Yeah. Because, because it is in opposition. It's the opposite morality in some sense.
And then I am more in line with Rose Wilder Lane in that acting in your self-interest is actually a glorification of your will or your consciousness, as you like to say, which is like the gift from God, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's why we're not cows.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. Anyway, but that's just my thought on it.
Yeah. No, that's good. Well, cool. Any other?
I wonder
fun
where
Reddit
this is going to
stuff?
go.
What do you mean? The book. Yeah.
Well, we were
I
going to
don't
talk
know.
about something, and then we shelved it. I don't remember what.
I mean, I was going to bring up so I was talking to somebody about the Ted Brown interview.
Oh, yeah.
It was about selflessness, I think, because it was about, they were saying just like, if we get rid of all these things, this is the whole, everybody, you're right, this is the common refrain against the libertarian point of view of wanting to dissolve everything. It's like, then, I mean, like, I want to help people. Like, so, like, that's why they feel like we should have these services in place and everything like that. And also that they feel like people won't do it if you don't have anybody telling them to do it. And then just pointing to, like, how nobody really donates to charity en masse, really. Like, people do, I'm not saying, but it's like...
They do more the less government interference.
And I mean, this was my point, is that it's like, potentially... I think it's because you are requiring people to be selfless in so many ways that then in any way that they can be selfish, they're going to take because you've demanded selflessness from them instead of allowing them to be selfless on their own volition.
Which isn't selflessness anyway.
Right. Well, yes. But that's the idea, right? That's what it's being packaged at. It's like you should want to give things to other people. But, it's tough. So, anyway, yeah. And, it was the person I was talking to was in their 60s and, just talking about, like, how they want to have Social Security. Like, they've been paying into this for many years. And this is I would say, a moral quandary because it is the idea that we probably won't benefit from Social Security the way it's going. So, at some point, there's going to be a generation of people who feel like they got gypped, right? Because they paid into something that ends up going bankrupt. So it just depends on when you do that.
I'll take being gypped if we can cancel the program.
Right. Well, and this is the thing, is they were like, just wait till I'm dead. And I'm like, well, this is the problem, though. And this is the problem with having people that old only in positions of power, because we're thinking about 30, 40 years. They're thinking about 10 to 20 years, right? And,
I mean, I agree, but this is the point that is like a political point. I'm not for pulling the rug out of everybody right now. And I've made this point. Actually, Brother X liked it on Twitter. I was surprised. This was a long time ago, but this was back when, like, a year and a half ago, with all the student loan canceling that didn't really happen. But but they claim it did, which is nice. But I was saying, fine. Like, if the argument is that these young kids or young adults have been duped and saddled with all this debt unfairly, we need to cancel their debt. Fine, cancel it, and then don't do it again. Like, no more federal subsidies for bad loans. Stop.
I see you with, like, your finger. No.
That's right. So cancel it and then stop the program.
Fannie Mae's come on.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Anyway, so it's that. Yeah. It's like, I get it. It's not fair that you've had to pay in and you don't get anything back. I agree. But we got to end it sometime because it's a terrible idea.
Well, and it will end at some point because we're not we're bankrupt, right? We're not funding it correctly,
right?
Yeah. Anyway, so that was the point I was going to make.
Yeah, I think just because something sounds good and sounds nice and kind, doesn't mean it is actually that. And I think also looking at the outcome. Are more people being helped than hurt by this thing? And this is not actually where I come from philosophically. However, I think that for those who are proponents of, quote, like, caring government policy, I think for those people, I would implore them to look at the outcomes of those policies.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And I've talked to people about this in Europe with like open border policies, because Europe has much stricter borders than the U.S. does in terms of immigration. And the idea of just letting people in the name of kindness and then they're like homeless, is that actually a kind act? Are you doing something helpful for this person, or are you don't want to look bad by saying, no, you can't come in?
Mm-hmm. Yes. But this is where I wonder, and I got to think about this more.
Right.
Well, let's not get into it. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, my political soapbox to end the episode.
Yes,
all right, folks.
I think that's good.
We got more Christianity coming at you next week. All right.
Thank the Lord.
Yeah, right. All right.
We
bye.
got a lot of penance since the Antichrist. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. See ya.